After I finished college, I moved out of my parents' house. I wanted a new life, sort of fresh and far away from my hometown. It's not like I hated my parents or couldn't stand them in any way. They were great and supportive. I just wanted to escape this hole I was living in and finally taste the adult life. There was really nothing to do here, and I wanted to try life in a big city. Unfortunately, after a month, I was already running out of money. I couldn't find a job in my industry, so I had to settle for anything that could pay my rent for the next month. The closest job to me was at a Dunkin' Donuts. I applied for this job and I was immediately hired. The first few weeks were hard, but later I actually enjoyed working there. I met some awesome people. One of them was Nina. We were getting along so well that we requested our supervisor to always sign us both in on the same shift. It was never that busy there, so we spent most of our time talking and gossiping. She was a really happy person, and I was in a similar position in life as me. Her parents kicked her out of the house when she was 18, but she had to work hard to finish her education and pay rent. I always supported her, and she gave me as much as she could back. We really became best friends. And that's how my life was. I was working at Dunkin' for about half a year now, and things were going great until a really strange man appeared into my life. He would always visit us on Friday evenings, and this consistency only added to the creepiness of his behavior. He used to order a cappuccino with 1 chocolate ring donut every single time. He was always wearing the same clothes, which was really weird and gross. It was a hideous green jacket with brown stains and dirty, roughed-up blue trousers. After making an order, he would always sit in the same exact table and would stare at me and Nina intensely. Of course, this never really bothered me at first. I considered myself a pretty decent-looking girl and have had a man's eye in my body here and there. But the way this man was staring at me, there was something disgusting about it. Made me sick to my stomach. I think it was more uncomfortable for Nina than me. She got really scared of him and told me she was afraid of him. But one day, he stayed longer than usual. It was almost closing hour and there were no more other customers. It was raining outside and Nina and I were sitting behind the counter and talking as usual. I was getting really annoyed because I knew I was the one with the key. I had to close the door. It was my closing shift and I would inevitably have to be the one to ask him to leave. Our manager had already left the building by now and it was just Nina, the man, and I. But right as I was going to go up to him and ask him to leave, he stood up and came to the counter. "How can I help you? Do you want anything else?" I asked. "I'm not hungry," he said, and there was a really long, awkward silence.
Sichere dir jetzt deinen Bonusartikel beim Einkauf im My Nintendo Store. Einfach Software auswählen und schon befindet sich dein Bonusartikel in deinem Warenkorb. Versand kostenfrei, schon ab 24,99 €. Alles von Nintendo, für dich an einem Ort.
Deine Tasche, deine Brille, deine neuen Sneaker, dein Outfit zum ersten Date. Absolut deine Stiefel, deine Bluse, deine Lederjacke, deine
I didn't really know what to say, so I just stared at the floor and waited for him to say something. "But I'm horny," he said, laughing. At that point, I was so anxious and embarrassed. I didn't even say anything back because I was just so confused and taken aback. "Come on, I was joking," the man said. "I've been visiting this place from time to time and I noticed a really pretty lady here. I'd love to get to know her closer, if you know what I mean." He laughed awkwardly. Nina and I looked at each other with wide eyes. I turned my head back to the man and told him, "Sorry, but I'm seeing someone." "I'm not talking about you," the man said, "but your friend over there. Can you ask her for her number?" He then started to stare at Nina, eyes and mouth wide open. It took me a second or two to realize, but I noticed his arm was shuffling around. I looked closer in. His hand was in his pants. This sick bastard was masturbating as he was talking to us. "You better leave right now, or I'm calling the police," I screamed. Nina was about to cry, but I stayed strong and tried to protect her. He tried to jump over the counter and grab Nina, but thankfully I knocked him over the edge and he landed on his head. We ran. We ran as fast as we could. We never looked back. When we got to safety, we called our manager, who called the police. The cops were quick in telling us that the man had gotten away, and they closed the case shortly after because there was really nothing they could do. As disappointing as this was, Nina and I were just happy that the man was off our backs. It seemed like things would go back to normal. A few days passed by and I almost forgot about him. Everything seemed to be back to normal and I enjoyed working with my best friend as a barista. Eventually, Nina and I had another closing shift. The day was ending and we were cleaning up the tables and preparing the building to get locked up. Nina eventually left for her usual smoke break. She left her stuff inside and went out through the back door, popped open a cigarette. After about half an hour, I realized that Nina still wasn't back in the store. This was odd. It would usually take Nina only about 10 minutes to take a cigarette break, and she'd never just leave work like this, not with her stuff left behind anyways. It made no sense. Her phone and her wallet were still in the store. I then remembered the man, and my heart and mind started to race. I instantly started worrying for the worst. I looked in the back of the store and she wasn't there. I looked in the back patio and there was no sign of her. Just a still lit cigarette lying on the ground. I called my manager and he called the police. We searched all night for her, looked up and down and couldn't seem to find her. It made no sense. Even the police were stumped. It's like she disappeared into thin air. That night, I could barely sleep. I knew the police were handling it, but I just wanted to know where she was. How could she disappear like this? A few grim and horrible days went by, and I got the news, but it wasn't the news I wanted. Nina was found dead in the woods, her body stripped half naked. She was violated and murdered, and we all knew who the culprit was. The police found the man not far away from the crime scene. He was staying in an old, dingy trailer. The man got life in prison, but this wouldn't fix the years of PTSD and mental health issues I'd have following this. I soon quit my job at Dunkin'. It was the right thing to do. I couldn't work there. Not after what happened to Nina.
2017, I managed to land myself a part-time job at my local Walmart here in Thornton, Colorado. A fairly large suburb of Denver, Brighton is many things. Close-knit, homely, but it's hardly the most exciting place in the world. I think that's why Halloween is one of my favorite times of year. We take the holiday pretty seriously, so the anticipation and build-up to the spookiest night in the calendar is something I really look forward to. The majority of work at Walmart during that time of year involves sorting and arranging displays for all the novelty Halloween products that are stocked during October. It was hard work, sure, but getting to mess around with all kinds of masks, costumes, and ghoulish accessories was actually really fun, even if it did cause our grumpy old supervisor to glare at us down the aisles. Halloween came and went, but I found myself kind of enjoying working at Walmart. I know that sounds crazy. The customers can be awful and the hours are pretty long, but I had grown close to my coworkers. There were even one or two that I would go so far as to call friends. So naturally, when one of the store managers asked if I wanted to extend my contract into the new year, I jumped at the chance. It would be one of the biggest mistakes of my life so far. The morning of November 1st, 2017 was a gray one. One of those mornings where the world couldn't be any less inviting. All I wanted to do was crawl back into bed and sleep away the day. But still, I dragged myself into the shower, washing away the cobwebs and preparing to face the day. I was due on from 10:30 until 6:30 that evening. I hated the longer weekday shifts. They had a tendency to drag, but the thought of getting a cup of coffee from my coworker, Teresa, who happened to make the best flat white this side of the Rockies, spurred me on to make it work on time. I was right. The day dragged on so bad I thought I was going to go crazy. The part-time weekend shifts were busy, but at least the activity made the time fly. Spending hours at a time counting endless boxes of merchandise as part of some pointless make-work stock take is enough to make your brain congeal. By the time 6 p.m. rolled around, I was about ready to give up. With so little time left on the clock, I found myself
Unternehmen suchen händeringend nach Textern, die ihnen dabei helfen können, mit den richtigen Worten mehr Kunden zu gewinnen.
Watching the minutes roll by, wandering around the store and pretending to look busy. I saw my friend Miguel hanging around near the front desk and struck up a casual conversation with him in an effort to kill another few minutes. That's when I saw him. I'd like to think I'm not an overly judgmental person, but this guy gave me the creeps right away. He was dressed pretty normally, a black leather jacket and reddish shirt, but it was the man's face that drew my eyes away from Miguel and caused a nervous feeling to run through me. He was pale, almost sickly looking. His cheeks were gaunt, his eyes ringed by black circles, sunken back into their sockets. It looked like a skull with nothing but a thin layer of flesh to disguise it. Miguel must have noticed the look on my face because he too turned to look. I suppose it was for the best that I reacted that way to seeing him. I think it might have saved both our lives. When I look back on it now, it's like time kind of slowed down for a few minutes. I know that's like a super cliched thing you only find in movies, but now I think there's kind of some truth in it. I remember every little moment, every little detail of those few seconds. The way his jacket, a few sizes too big for him, looked almost silly as he reached into the inside pocket. The way the polished metal of his handgun seemed to glint in the bright, artificial light of the store. I watched as the man looked around for a second or two, scanning the shop floor for his first victim, before he raised the pistol and fired. I was completely and utterly horrified. I would come to understand that there are 3 common reactions to a sudden rush of fear, the first 2 being the well-known fight-or-flight responses, but there's also one that no one ever seems to talk about: total shutdown. Unfortunately, that's what I experienced as the deafening bang of the first pistol shot echoed around the building and an unsuspecting customer collapsed to the floor. The older man dragged his shopping cart down with him, the contents spilling out as he lay bleeding on the ground. I couldn't move. I was just frozen to the spot. I had never seen anyone shot and only ever heard a gun fired like once or twice. I felt myself trembling, but for the life of me I couldn't bring myself to flee the horrific scene of violence unfolding before us. Thankfully, Miguel did not have the same reaction. He grabbed me by my arm, so hard it left a bruise, and dragged me behind a display of kitchen appliances to take cover from the shooter. All I could do was hang on to him and pray that the shots would stop. They didn't. Over and over again, the skull-faced man fired at staff and customers alike. I remember hearing this horrible cracking sound, like right next to us as we crouched behind the heavy appliances. I would later learn that this was the sound of the high-speed pieces of lead breaking the sound barrier as they traveled within a few inches of us. Just the thought makes me feel sick, even today. Suddenly, Miguel was pulling me by the arm again as we rushed towards one of the emergency exits that lined the shop floor. Shots were still ringing out as Miguel crashed into the metal bar that opens the door. The pop of the bullets still heard as we spilled out into the freezing Colorado night. Before us were 2 young children, maybe only about 7 or 8 years old. They were crying, asking for their dad. Those poor things had no idea what was going on, only that a bad thing was happening and they couldn't find their father. We tried to comfort them for a few moments while the sound of police sirens grew louder and louder until the parking lot was awash with the blue flashing lights of cop cars and other emergency vehicles. We eventually reunited the kids with their father, and he openly wept as he thanked us for finding his children. Miguel was struggling to hold back the tears, but I had completely broken down by that point. Many people had. In the aftermath of the shooting, a 48-year-old man named Scott Ostrom was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Ostrom was handed down 3 life sentences for the 3 people he shot and killed, plus another 48 years for the other victims that were lucky enough to have survived his bullets. During the sentencing, the presiding judge said that the killer had a black and malignant heart fatally bent on spreading fear, misery, and death. It was also brought up that Ostrom's sister said that he had never been the same since trying LSD in the 80s. No other motives were given for his crimes. I quit my job at Walmart and went to therapy for a while after the shootings. I felt a lot of survivor's guilt at first, wondering why Ostrom didn't choose me for his first victim, why those other people had to suffer the way they did while people like me got to walk away unscathed. But I mostly just thank God that Miguel was there to save me. Life is very precious, a fragile thing that can be snuffed out in an instant, so I try to live as full a life as I can, if only for the people who innocently shopping that day, unaware that they would never see their loved ones ever again. I work as part of the loss prevention team at my local Walmart. No, I'm not saying where. I don't want to lose my job. I really need the money. The incident I'm about to tell you about actually made national news too, and with the loss prevention team being so small, this whole story could be easily traced back to me. I hate my job. Yeah, I know I said I needed it, but that doesn't mean I don't despise it. I don't like spying on people, but unfortunately that's just what the job entails. Wandering around the aisles, staring at the CCTV, watching for someone walking too fast or acting nervously, it can get really boring sometimes. Sure, there's a little action every now and then. Some meth heads tries to steal a DVD player or something. We get to play cops and robbers for like half an hour until the real police show up. But half the time it's just sad. Some young, dumb addict breaking down in our office, telling us she didn't want it to be this way. Yeah, I didn't either. No one did. That's not even half of it, too. You know how angry a lone black guy can get if he thinks I'm following him around the store. I've been called racist more times.
Morgenzeit. Zeit für den perfekten Frühstückstoast mit Toasty One in deiner Küche.
Times than I can remember. I'm not. I'm just trying to do the job I hate so much, but it still sucks. You really see the worst in people working in loss prevention. But the weirdest thing I ever saw while working for Walmart wasn't a junkie thief or an armed robber or anything like that. It was something else entirely. So this guy comes walking through the doors one afternoon. Nothing particularly unusual about him. Nothing to give us loss prevention guys any suspicion. I take my eye off of him for a little while, patrolling the store as it was my turn to do so, instead of watching the cameras. I just sort of forget about the guy, you know? I mean, you try to take note of little details, but you do it with so many people that no one in particular stays in your mind, unless they're like really shady looking. I wander back around towards the meat aisle, casually keeping an eye on various shoppers when I see this guy again, the normal looking dude. He's balding, has a blue shirt on, and is just standing there checking out all the steaks, chops, and cutlets sitting in the fridge units. Again, nothing unusual, but here's where it starts getting weird. As I'm walking past the dude, his head sort of snaps towards me. I remember he had light-colored eyes that looked almost empty. I said hi or whatever, just greeted the dude, and this big wide smile stretches across his face. The guy had no teeth. Not a single tooth remained in this guy's head. Just 2 rows of diseased-looking gums that I had to stop myself recoiling from. I just tried not to react. I felt kind of sad for him. Maybe he's lost his dentures or something. I wouldn't judge, you know. So I do another loop of the store, watching families to try to rein in screaming kids as impatient singletons tut in their direction. I thought about how much I want kids myself, even if they can be rascals. It's something my mind wonders too often when I'm bored on the job. But as I'm coming back towards the meat aisle, something immediately strikes me as abnormal. The blue-shirted balding guy is still looking at the meat. Only this time, he's not just, looking at all the meat. He's staring at it. It looked like maybe one steak in particular had caught his eye or something. They weren't darting around like they were before. This time when I walk past him, he doesn't look up. He doesn't even move. He's just frozen to the spot, staring down into the fridge units with this dead look in his eyes. I mean, I seriously don't think he even blinked, and I watched him for a good few seconds. After this guy, I didn't take my usual loop around the store. I stopped at the end of the meat aisle, watching this guy slyly out of the corner of my eye. He didn't move an inch. It was seriously like one of those street mimes. Normal people never really stand still. They fidget, shift their weight from foot to foot. This guy was honestly as still as a statue, and it was really creepy. I called it in on the radio, asking a coworker about the balding man in the meat aisle, if he was known to the loss prevention team. Came back negative. The guy I was working with that day had never seen our toothless friend before in his life. So as I'm watching the guy, still listening to my buddy on the radio, the toothless man begins to reach into my meat fridge and pick up a large sirloin steak, still packed in plastic. I start feeling like an idiot. Maybe the guy just likes to take his time selecting his steak. He is toothless after all. Maybe he needs the right kind for his dentures. I don't know. Go figure. Then he brings the steak up to his nose, taking a long, deep sniff of this thing through the plastic wrapper. Now, I know this guy is obviously nuts. I know the crazy kids when I see them, and this is classic crazy. But he's still not stealing anything. He's technically not even doing anything wrong. Being a little nutty isn't exactly against the law. He then rips off the plastic wrapping, and that's my cue to step in. Only when I see what he does with the steak, I freeze in my tracks. The toothless man stuffs the raw steak into his mouth, straining his jaw as he tried to mush that thick piece of meat up with his bare gums. I was stunned. It was literally the last thing I expected a guy with no teeth to do. I actually thought he was going to stuff it down his pants or something. I've seen shoplifters stealing weirder stuff and hiding it in weirder places. But to see him actually push that steak right past his lips and start chewing, God, it was the freakiest thing I had ever seen. His eyes start rolling back into their sockets. His cheeks caved in as he started trying to suck all the fluids out of the raw piece of flesh. And the noises he made, good God, if the noises he made didn't scare the life out of me. Like a kind of moaning or something, like he was getting off trying to swallow that piece of raw steak whole, more and more of it being stuffed into his mouth with greedy hands. Watching him spit the meat out, panting and gasping for air, I rounded the corner of the aisle, actually terrified at this point that he would see me as the sole witness to what he had just done. I waited, having somehow managed to half freak myself out watching that weirdo doing that. He quickly escaped the meat aisle, his back to me as he walked quickly towards the main exit. I know I should have stopped him. It was my job to. But we're trained to keep our distance from offenders that we deem violent or unhinged and just let the cops deal with it. However, part of me wanted to know why he did something so gross. Is that why his teeth were missing? What kind of person was he that he couldn't be trusted with his own teeth? The cops picked the guy up eventually. Turns out he was a mental patient off his meds. Old guy too. So probably lost his teeth through simple lack of care. I mean, that's what they thought the deal was. Whatever was wrong with this guy, he certainly had previous convictions for retail theft. The cop that we spoke with said it was his fourth offense, that he was likely headed to federal prison for reoffending. I wonder how a guy like that would handle prison. Anyway, I don't know if you guys will find this particular story scary, but maybe it's just gross or sad. A poor old guy losing his mind like that, but either way, it's definitely the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me working for Walmart. Back when it was originally released, I really wanted to get my hands on a new Xbox One X. You know the one. It was 4K ready with a considerably faster processor. So naturally, I tried absolutely everything in my power to get one as immediately as I could. My local Walmart was having one of those Black Friday sales, and like so many others, I stood patiently in line, waiting to try and beat the rush to grab one. But I was nowhere near sprightly or fortunate enough to actually get one that way. So after failing to get one in person, I then tried getting one online. But as rapidly as I wanted one to own, the users who were reselling them were asking way too much money, and I simply couldn't afford to shell out double, or sometimes triple the price. After weeks of trying to find a way to get a hold of one, I had to come.
Sichere dir jetzt deinen Bonusartikel beim Einkauf im My Nintendo Store. Einfach Software auswählen und schon befindet sich dein Bonusartikel in deinem Warenkorb. Versand kostenfrei.
To the conclusion that it just wasn't to be. It was then that I had something of a stroke of luck. Although I had resorted to Craigslist in my desperation, I did actually find someone that was selling their Xbox One X at no more than the original buying price of the console. Naturally, I was skeptical. For the life of me, I simply couldn't fathom why they would do something like that, but one thought overrode all others. If I didn't put in a bid now, someone else would, and I could kiss my chance of owning a One X goodbye. I immediately emailed the seller and let them know that I was very interested. Not only that, but I had the cash on hand and was ready to go. I also offered to pay for gas or whatever it would take to get the console delivered to my door. I figured that would be a pretty appealing offer to someone who I guess was just strapped for cash around the holidays. I was stunned to get an almost instantaneous response, stating that they did still have the Xbox and were in fact still waiting for a proper bid from a serious buyer. They politely asked for a delivery address so they could bring it over as soon as possible. I was sort of hesitant to divulge such personal information and asked if it would be a better idea to first meet in public since it was much safer that way. I'll be honest, I wasn't too pleased with the idea of a total stranger coming over to my house, but he informed me that he was going to be very busy running holiday errands all day and that there would only be some pretty specific windows of opportunity to drop it off. It would be much more convenient for him if he was about to come over to my house. I was still not particularly ecstatic about the idea, but oh man, I really wanted that new 4K Xbox. So in the end, I agreed and texted the dude my home address. I figured it was safer than me going over to his place. At least this way I'd be on home turf. I was so happy and eager to get my hands on that new console, and that excitement only grew as I began waiting for the guy to turn up. But he took his sweet time. I mean, hours and hours passed by before I began to suspect that he wasn't going to actually show. Around 1 in the afternoon, 4 hours after he was due, I was seriously losing my cool, thinking it was a prank or something. I tried texting the guy back, asking him where he was. Previously, I had gotten pretty timely responses from the guy, but this time I didn't hear a single thing from him. By 6 that evening, I just lost all hope. I assumed that he got a better offer from someone else and didn't have the heart to tell me he picked a new buyer. I was disappointed, more than words can possibly describe. I got myself so psyched, and I can't even tell you how deflated I was. It's one thing not to have gotten the item from the store. I could come to terms with that. But I was so close to having one in my hands, it sucked having my hopes dashed so cruelly like that. And that didn't mean I'd given up entirely. So for the rest of the night, I kept looking around on Craigslist and other sites to find a new Xbox One X that was within my price range. But as I was getting ready to wind down for bed, I heard something. At first I had dismissed it as the wind or something, that it was maybe just my imagination. But then I heard it again. Someone knocking. Not at my front door, but lightly on the TV room window. I walked up to the bedroom window and peer out into the driveway, seeing this strange-looking dude at my front door looking around as if checking the coast is clear. I'm suspicious, but I go downstairs to see what he wants. He identified himself as the guy who had the Xbox, apologized for being so late, and explained he had gotten backtracked with errands during his day. Then he casually asked if I still had the money. I opened the door all the way, but still kept the screen door closed as a precaution. Something just didn't feel right, like at all. I told him that, yeah, I still had the cash on me, but I didn't see that he had anything with him, so I calmly asked if he had brought the Xbox with him, like if it's still in his car or anything. As expected, he told me it was out in his van. He told me to get the money and come out to the van with him and he would get it for me. I let him know that I wasn't really comfortable walking out to his van, but he seems to understand and tells me it was all good. I briefly look over the guy's shoulder and see that there is in fact someone else sitting there in the van. Not only that, but the dude at my door has been keeping his hands concealed in the little front pouch of his hoodie the whole time while talking to me, and there was definitely something more than just his hands in there. Don't ask me how I could tell. I just could. You know when you just get a gut feeling about something? Yeah, that. I tried to stay as chill as possible as I lied to him that I'd just go fetch my wallet and return in a minute. His mood immediately changed as I closed the door in his face before locking it. I then make the split-second decision, better to be safe than sorry, so I pull my phone out of my shorts and dial 911. But as I do, I heard a loud thud on my front door, then the sound of the van's engine revving before it zooms off into the night. When I went to check and see if he had damaged my door, I nearly peed my pants when I saw a rusty old hatchet buried in the wood. I was right that he had something in his sweatshirt, and that I shouldn't go out to the van with him. Be careful who you're buying from, folks. You never know who's behind the username.
I spend my days as a humble worker at 7-Eleven. More specifically, I was a store manager and franchise owner. I was no software engineer or doctor, and while my family did have their opinions on what I did for a living, my job paid rather well. I was a very different man in my past, but deciding to go the route of franchising a store was a more hands-on career path that mostly kept me in check. It was a low-stress but high-labor job, and that was honestly perfect for me. The job was almost therapeutic to me. It gave me something to take care of, something to look forward to every day. Of course, I couldn't do this alone. Working with me in my daytime shifts were workers Molly and Adam. Molly and Adam were young. They were working there to pay off their college tuition. We all considered ourselves like a family to each other. Molly, Adam, and I grew super close to each other in our time working there. They were like the kids I never had, and this naturally made me a little protective over them. We would always encounter weird or upset customers, and it was usually me who had to stand up for them. I didn't want anything to happen to them. They were so young. Nothing bad had happened to Molly or Adam yet, and I was grateful for that. But one early morning, that changed. It was a Tuesday morning. I want to say the incident occurred around 9 a.m. The sun was out and things seemed to be going normal. This time of day was always peaceful. There was usually never any problems. Eventually, a blue sedan pulled into the parking lot. Inside of the car was a rather average-looking middle-aged man. He stepped out of the car and started filling it with gas. While the pump was going, he then proceeded to the front of the store. As per their training, Molly and Adam greeted him. The man just nodded and started walking around the aisles. He then looped back around the store, approached Molly, and started flirting with her. Molly was visibly uncomfortable, and while I wanted to go to the back of the store and do my inventory logging, I couldn't do this, not with the man hitting on Molly like that. Adam, however, told me that he could handle the man if he started acting any weirder, and naturally, I trusted him. I reluctantly stepped in the back room and started counting down and logging all the items that were there. While I was doing this, however, I kept looking back towards the man to see what he was doing. It seemed like the man was looking back at me as well. This was odd for a number of reasons. Customers aren't supposed to be this close to the back of the store, and he kept awkwardly peering in through the utility room. To make things worse, every time I looked back, the man started to try and act busy. It was like he was trying to pass time or look natural for some reason. I stepped out of the room and asked the man if I could help him. He seemed to awkwardly and rudely shun me off and keep pacing around the store pretending like he was looking for something. For some reason, I decided to ignore all these red flags and continue my work in the back. Eventually, while Molly was passing by the back room, she whispered to me that the man was making her very uncomfortable. I told her that once I finished with the shelf I was working on, I would quickly go outside and help her. I essentially told her to hang in there and wait behind Adam. It was super confusing what the man even wanted. He seemed to have stopped flirting with Molly completely and was instead focused on trying to peer through the back door for some reason. As annoying as this was, I just wanted to get through my work. I had one last crate of granola bars to log down and I didn't want this weird man to stop that. But that's when I heard a commotion coming from the main room. "Excuse me, sir, you're not allowed to be back there. What are you trying to pull off?" "Call the police, Adam," I heard Molly exclaim right after that. I quickly ran out of the storage room to see what was happening and saw the commotion. The man in the blue car was trying to pull something off. I saw Molly in shock and fear in the corner, and Adam with his fists up standing right in front of her. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" I asked the man. Whoa, what kind of place is this? What's even back there? What are you guys hiding?" Get out of here. The sign clearly says employees only. You expect me to just sit here and let you get away with this? No way in hell. We were all in complete shock. Adam tried to calm the man down, however. Sir, we don't need to get violent, okay? You can just calm down and we don't have to— I don't want to hear another word from you psychos. The man snapped back at Adam. Molly started to cry. She was ready to dart out the store. The man then started reaching for his pocket. We had no idea what he was going to pull out. I tackled the man in the back of the shop and screamed at Adam and Molly to just head away and call the police. A few more minutes of us rustling in the utility room occurred. I managed to headlock the man, but he just kept hitting me off. After a few more minutes of us rustling and fighting in the back, the cops eventually got there. But sadly, they couldn't find him on the scene. We got the man's face on security camera, and his car was still at the pumps. We had both his face and his license plate on camera. Despite all this, the police just left. They couldn't find any sign of him, and they assumed that he just ran out through one of the other back doors. As the cops left, I made sure to dump the man's body right next to the first. As I mentioned before, I was a different man in my past. This job really changed me. It seemed like the man in the blue car clearly noticed the other body I had. Normally it's pretty well hidden. Not even Molly or Adam could find it. But I guess one of the legs must have been sticking out or something like that while I was moving stuff around. I re-looked at the security footage to make sure there was no evidence left behind. It seemed like the man wasn't reaching for a gun or a knife. He was reaching for his phone to call the police. I really didn't want it to be this way, but he knew my secret. The man was now part of my collection. Molly and Adam still have no idea what happened, and you bet I'm planning to keep it that way. They can't find out anything about my past. If they did, they'd be shattered. For now, my secret remains safe from the public eye, and I will ensure no one remembers that day. It was a somewhat nippy autumn night, and I was about halfway into my shift. I was a young man, and I took up any job I really could at the time. In this case, it was the late shift at 7-Eleven. In the United States, 7-Elevens are open 24 hours a day, and 7 days a week. This meant that someone had to take up that horrid night shift, and that person was me. As much as the job messed up my sleep schedule, it did help me do my coursework during the day, and it did pay a bit better than the normal shifts. I've been told that working in a convenience store is among the most dangerous jobs in the States, and this claim was honestly understandable. Although my city is decently safe, the people who go to 7-Elevens late at night are a lot different than your normal shopper. From what I saw, it was either crazy crackheads higher than a kite, or a bunch of drunken teenagers falling all over the place trying to make another booze run. This was extremely annoying. My coworker Colin and I were largely responsible for kicking these people out. And while it was an inconvenience, it never got truly out of hand or unsafe. This all changed one Thursday night, however. My coworker Colin had some sort of family emergency to take care of, and this resulted in him having to skip a few shifts. This meant that I was in charge of handling the dreaded 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift completely alone. This truly annoyed me. Colin was a really chill guy. His conversations made the hours go by much faster, and without him, I'd just be alone in some dirty store in the middle of the night. Regardless, I received my orders from my manager, and I had to do what I had to do. I arrived at my shift around 5 minutes late as usual, and things were initially going by completely normal. The people that walked in consisted of the usual late-night shoppers and people in their pajamas stopping for gas last minute. It seemed like a completely normal weekday night at first. But then, a little past the midnight hour, things got really strange. It was 12:15 at night, and I was sitting on my small chair next to the counter. I had just plugged in my phone into a charger, as it was running low on battery from using it all night, and that's when I noticed a car pull up to one of the pumps. It was a large black SUV. The windows in the back were either completely shattered or lazily replaced with cardboard and duct tape. A tall and rather large-built man stepped out in a trench coat and boots. He turned over to the front door of the store and started to calmly approach it. I just kept glancing at my phone, however. Most people walk in, quickly get something and leave. There was no need for formalities at this hour. "You call this customer service?" the man said in a low, husky voice. It took me a second or two to process that. The people who come in here, especially at this time, aren't exactly expecting award-winning service. "Oh, sorry, sir. Is there anything I can get for you?" The man just laughed. "Oh, kid, there's nothing you can get for me, but there is something you can do." At first, I thought the man was going to ask for some weird sexual favor. Funnily enough, I'd been asked this before while I was on the job. You see, I'm not a young man like you. My joints, they don't function like they used to. And you see my car over there? Well, it could use a wash and fill. The man's attitude and overall demeanor were really weird. The way the guy was talking was unsettling as it is. I mean, if the guy could walk all the way over here just fine, why couldn't he fill his own gas or wash his own windshield? However, state law says I have to assist any handicapped or impaired customers if they request it. There was no handicapped sticker on the man's car or any sign that he was disabled in any way. But hey, if they request it, I have to help them. Alright sir, give me a moment, I replied as I placed my phone to the side. I then turned on the pump from my control panel and started heading towards the car. Look at those youthful muscles work. I love to see it. For whatever reason, I ignored the man's creepiness and continued heading towards the car. The sooner I cleaned his windshield and filled his tank, the sooner he'd be out of there. At least that's what I hoped. As I stepped out of the building, the man seemed to remain in the store. He seemed to be browsing up and down the shelves or something. Whatever. I got to the vehicle, and sure enough, the gas cap was wide open and ready for me. As I was filling the van with gas, I couldn't help but think about what the man said. He seemed honestly fine and was totally capable of putting a nozzle in the gas tank. It made me wonder why I was even out there in the first place. But hell, if I could just get this weirdo out of there, I could get back inside to just messing around with my phone. After about a minute or two, the tank was full, and it was time for me to wash the man's windshield. As I stepped around towards the back of the van, however, I heard the back door shut. As weird as this was, keep in mind the car was really beaten down and old. It's kind of expected for a car like that to make weird noises, especially on a windy night like this one. I quickly pulled out the sponge and squeegee and started to get to work. But as I was cleaning the glass, that's when I felt it. The discomfort, the odd sensation of being watched or stalked. As I turned around, I felt a hand go over my eyes, and soon my mouth. I barely had any time to comprehend what was even happening. 1 second I was cleaning glass and the next I was being headlocked. I then heard the familiar sound of the front door to the store opening, and heavy footsteps coming my way. Too many thoughts were racing through my head at this moment, but somehow, somewhere, I mustered everything I had and flung myself as back hard as I could. The person holding me down crashed into the gas pump and shrieked in pain. "Damn it, Carl," the tall man said. I rolled back onto my feet and sprinted as hard as I could, my breath getting heavier and heavier every large stride I made. I managed to run across into a neighborhood and dive into the bushes, slowly peeping my head out to see if they were still following me in the van. After the longest 10 or so minutes of my life, my adrenaline died down, and I finally got the courage to step out of the bush. Just as I was about to call my manager and then the cops, it hit me. My phone was still in the store charging. Thankfully, however, a close friend of mine lived in the neighborhood I ran away towards. I knocked on his door and told him everything. Naturally, we called the police. When we went back to the station after the police told us they'd arrived, my manager was already there. Somehow, my manager and the police were as or more surprised than I was. Things like this rarely happen in my city. We always considered it a safe place. The police immediately looked through the CCTV footage as my manager suggested, and what we saw shocked us even more. When I had stepped out to wash and fill the van, the man jumped over the counter and tried to find and disable the security cameras in their footage. He couldn't manage to do this, so he just stepped outside and decided that deleting the footage wasn't worth all the time. We managed to capture the men's faces on video right after I made my escape. We then submitted the footage to the higher level police to see what was happening. It turns out, the men were known human traffickers and were on the run from previous kidnappings. The license plate on the van seemed to be fraudulent or stolen, as the numbers only matched a completely different vehicle on the other side of the state. The investigators believed that the men stopped by my city on the way to somewhere else, as they figured it was a safer area and people wouldn't expect them to be there. I quit my job at 7-Eleven immediately after that. The event scarred me. Every time I stepped into another gas station, I would always get reminded of how I almost got kidnapped. Needless to say, I would never pick up a job like that again. It was a normal Saturday like any other. While most people were having fun or enjoying their weekend, I was cooped up behind a register. I worked at 7-Eleven, and let's just say when you're in my financial situation, you don't really get a huge choice of what you can do over weekends. And while I could make a whole video on how much I hated mopping floors while my richer friends were out having fun, I wanted to get something off my chest. Something more serious, more sinister. I was working the primetime shift between 12 and 8. During this time of year, this is usually when the crowds of people get the largest. The area I live in is quite affluent. I mentioned this before, but my neighbors and my friends are quite rich. This led to a more interesting demographic with my customers. Wealthier people don't tend to shop at gas station convenience stores unless they have to. Most of them end up buying from premium grocery stores down the road. Unless it was some sort of necessity or emergency, no one really went inside. And even if they did, it was always something along the lines of a water bottle or some food or a snack for the road. The result of this was people mostly just serving themselves at the pump and me just sitting and doing nothing. As boring as this was, I honestly enjoyed just sitting and chilling out while people served themselves. This gave me the opportunity to do some schoolwork or listen to music. On weekends during this time of year, however, this dynamic changed. On weekends, there were junior soccer tournaments in local regions. These kids' league soccer competitions meant that travelers would either go into or through our town. This also meant that I had to work a little harder. People were getting more than just water. It would always be something like towels or hand sanitizers or the occasional coffee for the tired chaperone. Being fully aware it was soccer season, I really wasn't surprised at all that there were various large SUVs or minivans constantly pulling into the station. After all, youth soccer is very, very popular in the United States. But bear in mind, this was only during the rush hours. The flurry of cars would only come in right before the game started or right after they ended. Nothing really in between. So when a minivan with a chaperone sticker on the side pulled in at around 3 p.m., I was obviously confused. These games usually end at around 5 p.m. That means the rush hour starts at around 5:30 when everyone's leaving. But I said hell with it. Minivans are among the most popular vehicles in the US. Would it really be that uncommon for someone to just own one? And besides, a lot of things could have happened. Maybe a kid got injured and they had to leave early. Maybe they were getting gas now to avoid the rush hour later. Again, a smart choice. So I just resumed scrolling on my phone. But after several minutes, the van was still there. This is obviously not a normal amount of time for a vehicle to stop. But after the few long, awkward minutes went by, the driver stepped out. The driver was a scruffy, middle-aged man. He had a somewhat long beard but seemed overall unkempt. He then tried to fill the car with gas. He seemed to struggle for a few minutes trying to get the pump to work. The pump seemed to be having problems with his credit card reader. This wasn't all too uncommon. Our transaction processing system likes to reject cards it thinks are fraudulent, but off late it's been acting up and rejecting normal cards. The man walked into the store, and I greeted him like I usually do. "Welcome in, sir," I told the man. The man sort of angrily ignored what I said and walked up to the counter. As intimidating as this was, I've had my fair share of angry customers. It's something I'd been through. "The damn pump. It ain't taking my card." "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Our systems are kinda weird. Would you like to pay with cash instead?" "Fine, just take this. I need to go use the bathroom." The man left me with a wad of $10 bills and then went to use the bathroom. Clearly, the guy was having a bad day. I better get that pump rolling quick. So I opened up the terminal and tried to get things running. However, this wasn't working either. Normally customers can walk in and prepay a certain amount of cash at a certain pump, but it looked like the terminal wasn't responding itself. Something was genuinely wrong with this pump. The man was still in the bathroom, and I really wasn't in the mood to go and tell him that he had to move his vehicle. He was already cranky that his card got rejected. I didn't want to start another conflict with him. My next most logical option was to go to the pump itself and try and manually override it, and that's exactly what I did. My manager had taught me a few months ago how to put the pumps in admin mode. This would allow us to see if there was something physically wrong with the pump or it was just deciding not to work. But unfortunately, there was something seriously wrong with this pump. Something which I wouldn't be able to fix. This wasn't news I was excited to tell the man, but I knew I had to close this pump and eventually let him know that he'd have to move his car. But as I turned around to go inside, I heard a loud thud. I turned around and saw nothing. At first I thought it was something from my music. Keep in mind I have one AirPod in this whole time. But that's when I heard another knock from the van. This couldn't be my music. The knocks were random, they had no beat or rhythm, and they clearly weren't any instrument I'd heard of. I tried to peep in the back windows to see what was happening in there, but the back windows were tinted very, very dark. I really couldn't see in there. I then took my AirPod out to get a better understanding of what was even happening, and heard another thud. This was getting weird. I had to understand what was going on in that damn van. I took out my phone and turned on my flashlight, and I tried to use the flashlight to see better in through the tinted windows. Let's just say it worked, and what I saw horrified me. In the back of the car was a group of children. All of them were tied down with their mouths taped closed. All of them looked terrified. The knocking sound was coming from one of the kids kicking the car door as a sign for help. My heart sank. I didn't even know what to do for that second. I just stood there, frozen in fear and shock. In that
Telefonieren und surfen zum S-Budget-Preis. Jetzt mit 40 GB nur 9,90 € im Tarif Schnäppchen. Aber nur für kurze Zeit. S-Budget Mobile. Die SIM-Karte zum S-Budget-Preis.
That paralyzed moment of fear, that's when it all started to hit me. The man's anger and impatience, his fraudulent card not going through, the way he looked at me in the car as he was going to the bathroom. I knew exactly what was happening at this moment. After my brain cleared up, I realized I had to stop standing there and quickly go and do something. As I turned around quickly to try and run for help, I bumped right into someone. It was the man. You know, it's not polite to snoop around people's stuff, kid. The man told me, rage and anger under his breath. At this point, both of us knew exactly what was happening. For some reason, I thought I could talk my way out of this. You see, But as I was trying to make up some sort of excuse, the man lunged at me. With all of the luck in the world, I managed to dodge him. Keep in mind that I'm a rather skinny young man. Thankfully, I had the agility advantage on my side, and I could somehow outmaneuver him. As the man was getting back on his feet, I managed to grab one of the windshield cleaning wands from the bucket nearby. Without even thinking, I managed to smack him across the face with it as hard as I could. This seemed to knock him out cold. I then quickly smashed open the car windows using the same rod and let the kids out. All of the kids and I ran inside the store. We locked the doors and called the cops. The man was gaining consciousness by the time the cops came, but was handcuffed soon after. I told the police everything, and they instantly had a case. The man was part of a larger kidnapping ring in my state. Off late, their newest strategy was to pretend to be chaperones and kidnap kids from sports games. A lot of these sports teams have transportation services which help bring the kids in and out, and these people managed to find a way of pretending to be them. The kids were all thankfully okay, and they were instantly reunited with their parents. But obviously, this left a bad stain on our community. A lot of parents stopped using carpools or paid transportation to bring their kids in and out of the games. Some even de-enrolled their children permanently. I couldn't help but imagine what could have happened to those kids if that pump didn't fail, if the terminal just accepted his money and he could drive off. Needless to say, I quit 7-Eleven right after that. I was being paid to use a cash register, not deal with kidnappers. It was a cool spring evening, and I was a little more than halfway through a road trip. For a bit of context, I'm a 23-year-old man. I was starting my career as an aspiring actor and model at the time, and things were starting to pick up with my job. I was contacted by a well-known agency in Los Angeles, California, and they said they were willing to do a long-term contract with me and essentially were ready to start work. Obviously, I was thrilled, and while this was a dream come true, there was one issue. I lived in New York, and being a 23-year-old working an almost minimum wage job, I really couldn't afford to just hop on a flight and go over to LA. So when I got the news, I did the math, and I realized that it would actually be a lot cheaper to just drive from New York to California. Now obviously, if I had the money, I would obviously choose flying 6 hours over driving 40 in my dad's old Ford. But hey, money doesn't grow on trees, and I wasn't going to reject this opportunity. So there I was, about 24 hours into the trip. I had taken a rest somewhere in Kentucky, but was still quite tired. Sleeping in your car is never fun, especially after hours and hours of driving in it. A couple more hours went by and I caught myself in a rural part of West Texas. At this point, I noticed that my car was running a bit low on gas, and most importantly, the low air pressure light was on. My parents have had this car since I was a kid, so obviously I wasn't going to take the risk of just driving with the light on. After all, I wouldn't want to get stuck somewhere on the rural highway. According to the Maps app on my phone, the nearest gas station with an air pump was a local 7-Eleven, about 10 minutes off of my trip's path. It was late at night, 1 AM to be specific, but thankfully 7-Elevens are open 24/7. As much as the detour annoyed me, I really didn't have much of a choice. I was honestly lucky that there was even anything open and nearby. I drove up to the 7-Eleven and pulled my car into the nearest pump. I popped open my gas cap and started filling my car, and after a few minutes, surely enough, it was full. But then came the next and arguably most important step: fixing that tire pressure light. While I was out of my car, I tried to look around and look at which tire was tripping off the sensor. But as I was looking around, I noticed a shadow from inside the store. It moved somewhat awkwardly. It seemed like one of the store workers was peering out the window, and they backed away instantly when they saw me look over. Well, that's weird, I thought. Despite the clerk's social anxiety, I needed to get to my destination, and I didn't want to spend any more time here than I had to. So I went up to the air pump, and sadly enough, the air pump wasn't self-serve. This meant I had to go inside and talk to that nervous employee for help. Damn it. I walked in the door and looked around, but I didn't see any employees whatsoever. The store was barren, almost like it was up and running and suddenly abandoned. All of the lights were on and the equipment was functioning. The hum of the refrigerators and AC ironically made the silence even creepier. I figured that employee from before was somewhere in the back on his break, so I tried to get his attention. Hello? Excuse me? There was a long and awkward pause, followed by a set of steps coming in from the back. Hello? Is anyone there? I asked once again. Another long and awkward pause followed, and then eerie sounds of manic laughter. Excuse me? Is this some kind of joke? I asked, irritated from the antics. What was going on? Why was this employee acting like a kid? Come on over, don't be shy, the man said, trying to lure me over to the back. Don't get me wrong, I was beyond creeped out and confused at this point, but I just wanted him to hit the damn power switch to the pump. I reluctantly walked over to the back to check what was happening. I figured if I just played into this guy's weird game, he'd just listen to me or leave me alone. So naturally, I reluctantly walked over to the back. There was nothing behind the counter, but there seemed to be a constant giggling from a door that said employees only. My back was tense, and pretty much every urge in my body told me not to open the door, but mistakenly, I did. When I opened that door, I saw something I'd never forget for the rest of my life. In the room, there was a 7-Eleven employee, still in his vest and uniform, mutilated on the ground. Behind the employee was the man giggling from before, still chuckling. He was barefoot, sickly looking, and had tattered, bloody clothing. He then looked at me with manic eyes and started laughing even harder. My feet were frozen, almost like they were cemented into the ground. But then, the man's laughter turned into full-on screaming, and he started crawling towards me. I quickly slammed the door and darted towards my car, but as I was running, I felt something tug my ankle and trip me from behind. "Now don't leave so early," the man said, trying to drag me back. I kicked the man in the face as hard as I could and ran out. I quickly got into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. As soon as I pulled out of the spot, the crazy man jumped on my hood and started screaming at me to stop the car. I didn't know what else to do, so I just floored it, and that seemed to throw the man off. I kept driving and never looked back, sweating and panting the whole time. Eventually, the tire that was low on air got me, and I had to pull over into another town. I immediately called the local law enforcement and told them everything that happened. When they showed up to the scene, they did not find a single thing. Aside from the dead 7-Eleven worker and raided store with broken glass and flipped over shelves, the police couldn't find anything that could lead them to the man. The police could obviously identify the dead employee, but had no idea who the laughing man was or where he could be. The man was a ghost. I've never told anyone this story, at least not until now, and that's probably for good reasons. I currently live in LA, and while I am still pursuing my career in entertainment, I still sometimes think about where that man could be.
I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm a pretty strange guy. I've always been a loner, and I've always hated people for as long as I can remember. Which is why it's ironic that the scariest experiences of my life is associated with Valentine's Day. I was working after I graduated high school. I didn't want to go to college as I was really poor, and I didn't even know what I would want to do if I did go. My plan was to lay low for a little while and figure things out, maybe save up a little money. The gas station I worked at was the kind of place that grossed out visiting truckers. I remember this one time when a trucker stopped in. He saw me looking at my phone while I was waiting for him to get ready to pay for his beef jerky. He gave me a judgmental look and said I should take some responsibility for how bad the place looked. I didn't have the energy to explain that I wasn't the owner, so I just rang him out and asked if that was all he was going to order. He paid and left without another word. So yeah, it was one of those kinds of places. Anyway, it was Valentine's Day a couple of years back. I had volunteered to work the night shift because I made a couple of dollars more on the hour, which was always nice. Plus, it's normally pretty slow and there isn't much to do. I normally amuse myself by looking at memes on Reddit. But I remember on this particular night, the entire mood was different. I don't know what it was, but I had an ominous, foreboding feeling in my heart that night. And I'm not normally the kind of person who buys into the whole paranormal thing. I must have gotten that feeling around 12 a.m. I tried to brush it off as best I could, but I felt oddly on edge. The strangest thing was that I had worked plenty of night shifts before. I never had a feeling like this. I was so busy trying to calm myself down and fighting my own fear that I didn't even notice him. A man had come into the gas station. Must have been about 1:15 a.m. or so. I remember his face so vividly, so aged. His eyes were extremely off-putting. If you gazed into them for long enough, you would inevitably find yourself wondering about the guy's mental state. Suffice to say, he was a creepy man. He seemed to be in a rush. I remember noticing how swiftly he moved through the aisles, and he instinctually knew exactly what he needed. Didn't have to stop and think even once. Most people do. He came up to the register, looking to buy a small gardening shovel, duct tape, and a rope. I remember looking down at the items and immediately wondering if this guy was some sort of serial killer or something. That was the exact moment I got out of my own head. I stuttered when I asked him if he wanted anything else. He didn't say a word, just pointed directly at the cigarettes behind my head. I placed a pack of Marlboro Lights on the counter and looked back at the man. He was holding up his hand with 2 fingers. It took me a second to figure out that he had wanted another pack of cigarettes. I rang everything up. I could hear his breathing increasing. It was as if he was annoyed that I wasn't rushing. I tried breaking the tension by making a joke. "Got a gardening day tonight, do ya?" His facial expression didn't change at all. He made direct eye contact with me and simply shook his head up and down. I told him that his total would be $34. He slapped down 2 20s on the table, grabbed his items without a bag, and darted out of the gas station. I went outside to watch him leave. I know I'm not supposed to do that, but I couldn't help myself. I was so curious by this point. What was he buying those things for? Did I seriously just meet an actual serial killer? All of the wondering thoughts left my head immediately when I saw him slam on the brakes. He turned his truck around and began speeding back to the gas station. My body went into full panic mode. I ran back inside, closed the doors, locked them, put the close sign up, and I actually called the police. He pulled up outside of the gas station and put his truck in park. My heart was pounding in my chest. I screamed at the dispatch the address and then put the phone down on the counter. I mentally made peace with the fact that I might actually die, and I hoped that at least someone could hear me dying. I heard him start beating on the door trying to get in. The only weapon I had available was one of those shovels from the random utility aisles. I darted across the gas station and grabbed one, bracing myself. I screamed at him that the police were coming and...
Die Kia Elektrofahrzeuge. Technologie, die dich bewegen wird.
He had no chance. I didn't believe the words as they left my mouth. The doors were made of some kind of fiber or plastic material. I think they were even bulletproof, so I knew I was safe for at least a little while. That was when he stopped pounding on the door. I thought he was going to drive his truck into the gas station to get inside, but thankfully the thought never struck his mind. He did, however, break one of the windows and throw a lit match inside. After that, he drove off into the night. I quickly put the fire out, and the police got there about 20 minutes after everything happened. One of the cops tried making a joke about this guy's attempt to burn the place down, and I was too dazed to hear it. I just remember the guy pity laughed at his own joke before walking back to his police car. I explained to them the entire situation from beginning to end. I still have no clue why he suddenly decided that he just wanted to hurt me. Perhaps he wanted one less potential witness. Maybe he was just a random psychopath. Maybe it was because he saw me peering back at him and that triggered him. And as dramatic as this experience may have been, I still get really anxious thinking about the items that he had purchased. I still wonder sometimes if he had purchased those things to torture someone he had kidnapped, because he was definitely capable. Even if I ever get a girlfriend at some point in the future, Valentine's Day will never be the same. We wanted to have a good time together, my girlfriend and I. You see, she's a nurse and has to work the night shift. The hospital she works at requires about 5 years of experience before you can even think of working on day shift. This wouldn't be such a problem, but I work as a marketer. I have a typical 9 to 5 in an office, and it's really tough finding time for each other. Our sleep schedules are chaotic, to say the least. So when Valentine's Day rolled around on a day and night that we were both working, we got really frustrated. It's really hard to explain how you feel like you're being cheated out of time, like there isn't going to be a moment you can sit down and truly enjoy your relationship for what it is. But we decided that we weren't going to let our lame schedules get the best of us. We decided that we'd visit a city for a weekend away. Valentine's Day fell on a Thursday, but we figured having a little trip that weekend would be the next best thing, maybe even better. She's been really adamant about visiting Oak Ridge in Tennessee. Her grandfather worked there back in the day, and it's always been of interest to her. She's always telling me these facts about how creepy it is and how she just has to go one day. It's roughly an 8-hour drive from where we live, so we made a deal about driving. I was going to drive the entire way there, and she was going to drive while we were actually in the city. She totally got the good deal of the bargain, but that's just what you do when you care for your girlfriend. But something strange happened. Something that has tainted my memory ever since that time. When I think back and remember that weekend away, I'm not thinking about us cuddling up on the couch or any of the fun places we got to visit there either. We got there Friday night. She mostly slept in the car, but still felt really tired. She told me she'd be able to sleep that night we got there and be awake and normal for the next day, so that's just what we did. And it was a really great day. We got to visit a museum and learn about the Manhattan Project. Even got to visit the plant where her grandfather used to work. At least we're pretty sure. He's deceased now, but the tour guide said this was where the majority of the work on the bombs were done. And well, he worked on them, I guess. It was crazy. Anyway, the day was great, but it didn't last very long. By the time it was dark, we were out of ideas for things to do and, quite frankly, out of energy. We decided to visit our favorite fast food joint, Wendy's. Don't judge us. And she was driving as we made our way there. It was only a 10 to 15 minute drive. She had her music on and I was just kind of looking out the window. At one point, a blue Mustang was beside her car. We were stopped at a red light, and I looked out the window and peered into theirs. I saw a very old man. He looked unhappy, miserable even. His skin looked unnaturally pale. I'm not sure when he started, but he was staring at me. It wasn't until I looked into the car that I noticed it either. Not gonna lie, it kind of freaked me out. We made eye contact for about 5 seconds, and then for the briefest of moments, he smiled. But it was so fast, it must have been a split second that his mouth went into a smile and then back into a frown. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen. I looked over at my girlfriend, and she hadn't noticed at all. She was jamming out to Bohemian Rhapsody. The light turned green, and we were in motion again. I didn't take my eyes off of that car for the rest of that ride. At least, until they turned. That's not the craziest part. You see, it gets even weirder. We were planning on leaving Monday morning, and on Sunday night we went out to eat, but this time to an actual restaurant. We weren't feeling fast food again. We looked on Google and found a local restaurant that had pretty decent reviews. I had my favorite food, deep-fried chicken, so off we went. I had completely forgotten about that strange man I saw in that car, but about halfway through my meal I noticed him again. This time he was in the restaurant. He was staring at me. I know he was. And when I noticed, he did that exact same facial movement, just the way I remembered. He went from a miserable frown, and in a split second, he was smiling only for his face to be frowning again in just the next instant. I'm not sure my reaction was warranted. He hadn't actually done anything wrong to me, and I was enjoying a nice meal with my girlfriend, which is why it was so strange for my fight or flight to kick in, and I went up and confronted him. He was sitting in a booth alone. I asked him why he was staring at us like that. To my absolute surprise, he never said a word, just sat there and frowned at me. I asked him what his problem was before my girlfriend told me it was time we head home. She knows I can get a little worked up and wanted to avoid a confrontation. "It's not illegal to look at people," she said. Still, though, it was something about that man that made me feel so strange, so watched. Well, Monday morning came. We were about an hour into the car ride home, and she was asleep again. And you guessed it. You totally guessed it. I saw this freaky old man again. But this time it was way worse. For starters, he was driving a totally different car. I don't know what this guy's life is like, but I can just imagine what you have to do to be able to afford a Mustang and still have enough money to have a second car. And to make matters even worse, he had been in the left lane as he was going to pass me. But he didn't. He just paced me for about a mile. I noticed that there was a car next to me, and it wasn't until I looked over to flip the bird that I recognized him. It was a creepy old man, but he wasn't frowning anymore. That smile that he'd only been able to muster for a split second was now permanently stained on his aged face. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. Suddenly, he turns his head forward and aggressively veers his car in my direction. Reflexively, I slam the brakes and swerve off to the side of the road. My wife is immediately shaken awake, and all we can see is his vehicle speeding off in the distance through a cloud of dirt. My heart was racing like crazy, and by the time I could process my girlfriend screaming, asking what's going on, I started to feel myself choke up. We discussed whether we should waste our time calling the police, but I was so scared that the best course of action seemed to get out of that godforsaken town as fast as possible. The rest of the ride home happened without incident, and I haven't seen him since. Needless to say, that was the least romantic and most insane Valentine's Day ever. This is probably the weirdest experience that has ever happened to me. One that is causing me a lot of trauma and seriously has made it difficult to ever date like a normal person ever again. Let me give you some background. I'm a 23-year-old woman. I live in a small town in rural Mississippi. I know everyone in the town and they all know me. I never quite fit in with the small town scene. It wasn't that I was against it or anything, but there just wasn't anyone I really clicked with. I had lots of friends, but I was still completely alone for as long as I can remember. A couple of years ago, I started dating a guy who I met on Tinder. He was from a couple of towns over and wasn't the best-looking guy in the world, but I don't let something like that stop me. I just wanted to know if he was nice and compatible with me. So we went out on a couple of dates. Didn't go horribly. He was a perfect gentleman, and every time, he never pressured me into doing anything that I didn't feel comfortable with, which I really appreciated. So after about 3 weeks of casual dates here and there, we made the decision that we really had something here. We both deleted our Tinder accounts together and started spending more time with each other. Honestly, I thought we had a real chance of having a lasting relationship. But as the time went by, I noticed that he was weird. And not the I watch conspiracy theory documentaries on Netflix kind of weird. I mean, I saw some real signs of various mental illnesses. Some of them included narcissistic personality disorder, bipolar disorder, with some extreme episodes of anxiety and depression. And he would eventually go insane over some of these things that stressed him out. So one of the times he got into one of those episodes was when his uncle was going to visit. His parents asked him to sleep on the couch so his uncle could sleep in his bed, and he had a literal mental breakdown. I remember me and him texting back and forth, and he was asking me if it was a good idea to physically attack him or start a fight. A few more incidents like that, and I knew that I had to end this relationship quick. As much as I want to help people, I really don't want to sacrifice my own well-being for the sake of helping anyone else. It was probably 3 or 4 weeks into our relationship that I made the decision. I asked him if he wanted to get some coffee, and he agreed. We broke up, and he actually took it rather well, which surprised me. I wasn't expecting him to have some kind of breakdown, and while he did look sad, he didn't act inappropriately towards me at all.